Usually when we think about navigating a space, we rely on landmarks. I mean, you enter a dark room, you put your hands out, and you feel for the edge of a table or the frame of a door.
Right. It's a very physical, measurable process.
Exactly. You build this mental map based on solid objects. But what happens when the room you are trying to navigate is actually your own mind?
Oh, well, then that physical map is completely useless.
It really is. Suddenly you are walking in the dark, and you are constantly stubbing your toe on your own shifting beliefs or your emotional responses, even your spiritual experiences.
Yeah, you don't have those physical walls to guide you.
So for today's deep dive, we're exploring a 2025 survival guide for that exact mental darkness. It is a brilliant, highly original primer by Seriously Peter, and it's titled Mathematical Phenomenology and Hermeneutics.
Which I know that title sounds like a prerequisite for some, like, grueling graduate-level philosophy
It
seminar.
really does sound intense.
But the actual text is incredibly grounded. It takes the rigid language of mathematics and uses it to map human consciousness.
Like giving us a structural vocabulary for those invisible, purely subjective events in our lives.
Exactly.
And the ultimate goal of this deep dive today is to unpack my absolute favorite part of the source material. It's the author's mental safety protocol, a system called A.I.D. the E.A.R.
Pronounced A.I.D the ear, right?
Yes, A.I.D. the E.A.R. It's basically a framework designed to keep you sane when your reality starts to blur. But before we get to A.I.D. the E.A.R., we kind of have to understand the radical way this author restructures reality itself.
Yeah, you have to set the stage first.
Okay, let's unpack this. The book starts by tackling a massive, ancient dilemma, like combining the concept of God with the rigid logic of mathematics. And doing that usually triggers what the text calls a black hole of dialectics.
Which is such an accurate description of those endless, unwinnable debates.
Oh, totally.
You know, the ones arguing over who God is, what God is, my God versus your God, or, whether there is a God at all.
It's exhausting.
It really forms this event horizon where intellectual conversations just go to die. It pulls in all your mental energy and lets zero light escape.
So the author realizes this, right? Trying to build a mathematical framework for spiritual experience by first trying to prove or disprove the divine well, it's a trap.
It is a total trap. So
Yeah.
the author looks for a workaround.
And the text actually references the Kobayashi Maru from Star Trek.
I love that comparison.
Right. For anyone unfamiliar, it is a Starfleet training simulation designed to be entirely unwinnable. If you try to rescue a stranded ship, you die. If you don't rescue them, they die.
But Captain Kirk famously beat the test.
He did, but not by being a better tactician. He just reprogrammed the simulation code. He literally changed the parameters so a win condition was actually possible.
And seriously, Peter pulls a very similar maneuver here.
How so?
Well, instead of getting sucked into that black hole of arguing historical theology or the material existence of the divine, the author simply treats God as an axiom.
Okay, an axiom, meaning a self-evident truth in math that you just accept so you can actually build a system on top of it.
Yes, that is the crucial pivot. In mathematics, every single system needs a starting point. By declaring the concept of God as axiomatic within this specific framework, the author completely bypasses that unwinnable debate.
You just assume the foundation is there.
Exactly. You are no longer wasting energy arguing if the foundation of a building exists. You are assuming it's there, and you are mapping how the structure built on top of it behaves under stress.
Okay, I have to push back a little bit here because the author uses a very old joke to illustrate this, and honestly, it made me highly suspicious.
Oh, the fence joke?
Yeah. So the joke goes like this. An engineer, a physicist, and a mathematician are told to build a fence around a flock of sheep using as little material as possible.
Right.
So the engineer builds a tight, efficient circle. The physicist builds a theoretical, infinite fence and pulls it tight. But the mathematician just wraps a tiny piece of fencing tightly around herself and mathematically defines herself as being on the outside of the fence.
I mean, it illustrates the point perfectly.
It does. But is the author just pulling a fast one here? I mean, are they just redefining reality, wrapping a tiny fence around themselves to win an argument? Or is there actual practical utility in treating the divine as a mathematical axiom?
That question gets to the very heart of how we misunderstand mathematics. To see the utility, you have to look at the massive shift the author is making here.
Okay, walk me through the shift.
Most of us operate using an algebraic method. In algebra, you are constantly seeking an unknown variable. You are trying to solve for x.
Sure, finding the missing piece.
But this framework shifts to a geometric method. In geometry, you assume a given statement or shape is true, and then you map out the relationships, the angles, and the behaviors that emerge from that truth.
Oh, I see. So it's less about hunting for the elusive right answer and more about observing the patterns that unfold from a starting point.
Right. And doing that requires us to strip away a lot of our conditioning. Because the author argues that society has trapped us in what they call CCAP math.
CAP math.
Yeah.
Consistency, accuracy, predictability.
Exactly. CAF math is what we are all taught in school, and it's heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution. It's entirely procedural.
It's about getting the correct answer as quickly as possible.
Yes, so you can become a functioning cog in an economy of goods and services.
The math of standardized tests, graduation caps, and cash registers.
It is cold, it is rigid, and honestly, it feels totally disconnected from the human soul.
Yeah, it really does.
But the author is saying math isn't just a noun, it is fundamentally a verb. It is an action. You are doing math right now.
Wait, really? How?
Your brain is taking in audio data, processing it, comparing it against your existing beliefs, and separating the signal from the noise.
Wow. Yeah.
When you intuitively adjust your tone of voice because you sense a friend is upset, you are performing complex mathematics. It is the language of motion, change, and convergence.
And the text applies this to our deepest emotional states, giving them actual shapes.
Yes, and this is so brilliant.
Like, the author says that grief acts like a topological rupture, and insight acts like wave interference.
Yeah.
But we need to define those terms, because they sound incredibly dense.
They do, yeah.
What does a topological rupture actually mean for someone experiencing loss?
Well, think about the fabric of your daily routine, your habits, your relationships, your expectations.
Okay, got it.
A normal bad day, like getting a flat tire, is just a stretch or a bend in that fabric. It snaps back.
Right, you get over it.
But grief is a topological rupture. It physically tears a hole in the structure of your reality. You cannot just smooth it out or iron it back to normal. The geometry of your life has fundamentally, permanently changed shape.
Wow. That is a powerful way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And insight acting like wave interference.
So imagine two completely separate ripples in a pond moving toward each other. When they collide, they don't just pass through each other, they interact.
They compound.
Exactly. In your mind, wave interference is when two totally unrelated thoughts suddenly collide and amplify each other into a massive wave of clarity.
Oh, so that sudden aha moment isn't magic.
Nope, it is mathematical interference.
Okay, here's where it gets real interesting. If our lived experiences, our pain, our epiphanies have these mathematically detectable shapes, how do we know we aren't just making things up?
That is the big risk.
Right, because this brings up the danger of apophenia, which is the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between completely unrelated things, like seeing a face in the clouds.
Or seeing a pattern in random data.
Exactly. If I am feeling a complex emotion and I map it to a sine wave, how do I know I'm not just, wearing spiritual cosplay?
And that is the most dangerous part of exploring your own mind. You need a structural safeguard.
Which brings us to the absolute core of this entire text, the A.I.D, the E.A.R framework. This is the diagnostic safety check.
Let's get into it.
So let's look at the first half of this protocol, the A.I.D, because it explains exactly how our brains process reality. A.I.D stands for illusion, illusion, and delusion.
Let's break down the mechanics of those three stages.
Starting with the A, illusion. Normally we think of an illusion as a literary reference, pointing to a book or a poem. But in this framework, the illusion is the raw feeling itself.
It is the core idea.
Right, the internal activation. The text uses the realization of hunger as an example. The illusion isn't a picture of food. It is the internal abstract thought of deliciousness.
It is that profound, invisible human desire to be meaningfully fulfilled.
Yeah, exactly.
It is the raw signal, the true north of your current state.
But our brains struggle to just sit with a raw, abstract concept. We need a delivery mechanism. We need a shape.
We crave a tangible image.
And that brings us to the I illusion. The illusion is the parabolic vehicle that brings that core feeling to your physical senses.
Ooh, give us an example.
Well, if the illusion is the invisible desire for deliciousness, the illusion is a highly produced television commercial showing someone slowly eating a perfectly styled hamburger.
Oh yeah, you see the melted cheese, you hear the crunch of the lettuce.
Right, the commercial engages your senses to illustrate the feeling. It triggers the illusion.
The illusion is just a tool. It carries the message.
But then we hit the D, delusion. This is the catastrophe. Delusion occurs when the structural coherence of your mind collapses, and you mistakenly believe that the illusion is the absolute truth of the illusion.
Meaning you collapse the vehicle and the message into the exact same object.
Yes, you mistakenly believe that this specific drive-through fast food hamburger is the only thing in the entire universe that can fulfill your profound human hunger.
You confuse the sensory image for the fundamental truth.
Exactly. And if we look at the broader mechanism here, it explains a massive amount of modern anxiety and dissatisfaction. Why are we so prone to this collapse? Why do we constantly fall into delusion?
Well, because modern media, algorithms, and marketing relentlessly condition us to do so.
They really do.
They create incredibly rigid, stylized illusions.
Like the text mentions the classic marketing illusion that love begins at 2 carrots.
That is the perfect example of weaponized illusion. The illusion, the true internal signal, is the human need for deep, sacrificial connection.
Which is totally valid.
Absolutely. But the marketing industry creates an illusion, a diamond ring. And over time, society collapses the two.
We get brainwashed.
We are handed a very narrow delusion that love mathematically equates to an expensive stone.
And when we mistake that marketing illusion for the true illusion of love, something incredibly destructive happens in the human psyche.
Right, we start to pathologize natural human features.
Yeah, if your relationship or your career or your spiritual life doesn't look like the stylized image you've been sold, you assume you're broken.
You think you failed the math equation.
Exactly. So if our brains are biologically and socially wired to collapse the illusion and the illusion, if we are practically programmed for delusion, how do we manually override that system?
What is the safety switch?
Yeah, how do we fight back?
We have to deploy the active auditing process. We have to use our E.A.R.
Which is the second half of the framework. To maintain our mental integrity, we must aid the E.A.R. E.A.R. stands for Experience, Analyze, and then Rebuke or Receive.
Let's walk through a real-time, step-by-step psychological application of this.
Okay, let's do it. Imagine you are scrolling on your phone late at night, you're feeling stressed, and you see a beautifully targeted ad for an incredibly expensive, serene luxury vacation in Bali.
Oh, a very common scenario.
Definitely. Step 1. E. Experience the illusion. You don't ignore the feeling. You acknowledge the true internal signal. You are exhausted. You desire peace and rest. That is a valid, real illusion.
Right, you don't suppress it.
Step 2. A. Analyze the illusion. You look critically at the vehicle delivering the message. You recognize that the ad is a constructed vehicle. It is a cinematic representation of peace, not peace itself.
Which sets up the crucial final step.
Exactly. Step 3. Rebuke the delusion or receive discernment. You rebuke the false idea, the delusion that only spending $10,000 on this specific trip will give you peace.
Oh, right, that's the trap.
Instead, you receive the discernment that you are burned out and you just need to unplug your phone and take a break this weekend.
The author uses a brilliant analogy about reading a map to explain this process.
Not the map analogy, yeah.
Finding north on a paper map is incredibly easy. You just point to the top edge of the page.
Done?
But finding north when you are actually lost in the wilderness requires you to first fix your position in relation to the physical terrain around you. Applying A.I.D the E.A.R is how you fix your position in reality.
That makes so much sense. Now, you use the word discernment, and the text specifically calls discernment the epistemic auditor. Let's translate that out of the academic jargon.
Okay, so an epistemic auditor is essentially your mind's internal accountant for truth.
I love that.
When a company gets audited, a third party comes in to check if the numbers on the spreadsheet actually match the money in the bank. Discernment does that for your brain.
It's a reality check.
Exactly. It pauses the emotional reaction and asks, what underlying need in me does this image actually fulfill? Is this image the actual object of my fulfillment, or is it just a reminder that I need to seek fulfillment?
And the stakes for not running that audit are honestly terrifying. The author warns that without discernment, these concepts mutate.
They absolutely metastasize. What's fascinating here is that without the epistemic auditor, an illusion doesn't just remain a subjective feeling. It hardens into an inflexible dogma.
It becomes rigid.
Yes. And an illusion doesn't remain a helpful symbol. It becomes an idol that demands worship.
Why?
And delusion doesn't just remain a simple mistake. It scales up into a cult system where reality is entirely replaced by the false image.
Dogma, idols, and cults.
That is the eventual mathematical trajectory of a mind that refuses to audit its own reality.
So it's easy to intellectualize this while we sit here and discuss it. But what does it actually look like to wake up from that?
It's tough.
What if someone is already deep in the delusion, like they have built an idol out of their career or their relationship or a political ideology, and they don't even realize it? How do you wake them up?
That brings us to the concept of strategic disruption, or what the author playfully refers to as mental whiplash.
Mental whiplash.
Yeah. Sometimes realignment is a practiced, slow habit. But when a mind is deeply entrenched in a recursive loop of delusion, it often requires a forced collapse and rebuild.
A shock to the system.
Exactly, an external shock, a profound failure, a sudden loss, or a shattering breakthrough that violently forces an honest gaze at reality.
And the author is very transparent that this entire mathematical phenomenology framework wasn't born in a sterile classroom.
No, not at all.
It was built out of their own 7.5-year black hole of doubt, grief, and intellectual collapse.
It took a massive disruption to forge this system.
And to illustrate this journey from delusion to reality, the text provides a stunning scientific metaphor. It uses chemistry,
This is one of my favorite parts.
specifically nitrogen, which the author calls atom 7. Let's look at the math. Nitrogen has 7 protons, 7 neutrons, and 7 electrons.
And the number 7 carries immense symbolic gravity for completeness across almost every culture.
Right. But it is the actual physical chemistry of how nitrogen behaves that perfectly mirrors the human mind breaking out of an illusion.
It really is the most elegant synthesis of hard science and phenomenology in the text.
How does it work?
Well, nitrogen gas, or N2, makes up roughly 78% of Earth's atmosphere. And in that gaseous state, it is highly stable. It is held together by a triple bond, which is one of the strongest chemical bonds in nature.
So it is just floating up there, completely inert.
Yes, the text describes it as being pure potential, but no participation. It is completely unusable to most forms of life while it remains in the sky.
Okay, so if we connect this back to the A.I.D framework, when you are stuck in a delusion, your mind is exactly like that N2 gas.
Precisely. You might feel incredibly stable, you might feel secure, hovering above the messy reality of life, locked in your rigid beliefs.
But you are completely inert. You are not actually growing, and you are of no use to the ecosystem around you.
Exactly.
So how does the gas become useful?
It requires a massive, violent shock. For nitrogen to actually participate in life, it requires a literal lightning strike.
Wow, a lightning strike.
Yes, that immense heat and energy breaks the indestructible triple bond and forces the nitrogen to fall and fixate into the earth, into the soil.
The dirt representing actual reality.
Yes. The lightning strike is the strategic disruption. It is the trauma, the heartbreak, or just the painful realization that the hamburger ad isn't going to save you.
It shatters the false illusion of stability.
You fall into the messy, complicated dirt of reality, but once you fixate in the dirt, everything changes.
Because fixated nitrogen drives the DNA of all living things.
Right. It builds the proteins in our bodies. It is the chemical whisper behind the neurons firing in our brains.
And on a macro scale, we use it for explosive power in rockets.
You go from an inert gas to life in motion.
That is incredible. The journey of nitrogen, starting stable but useless in the sky, being shattered by a lightning strike, falling into the dirt, and reconstructing into the explosive fuel of DNA is the exact mirror of a human mind.
It really is.
You start stuck in an illusion, you experience a strategic disruption, you fall into reality, and from there, you reconstruct into a self-aware, dynamic participant in your own life.
Which is why the author insists that recognizing these patterns isn't a pathology. It is a vital epistemic skill. But you need the coordinate system of reality to place those patterns. Otherwise, you just float away in the noise.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
It's the big question.
I think the core takeaway here is incredibly empowering. You do not need to be a theoretical mathematician, a chemist, or a theologian to benefit from the architecture this text provides.
Not at all.
The goal is incredibly practical. You just need to begin practicing A.I.D the E.A.R in your daily life.
Just run the audit.
Yes. The next time you are sold an image, whether it is a targeted ad on your phone, a politician's promise, or a rigid doctrine, just pause.
Run the epistemic audit.
Separate the internal feeling you're experiencing from the vehicle that is trying to deliver it to you. Acknowledge your hunger, but do not worship the image of the hamburger.
And that practice leads to an important final thought. The author leaves us with a highly provocative quote.
No, what is it?
Naming the pattern does not generate it. It reveals your relationship to it.
That is profound.
If mathematics is fundamentally an action that translates the activity of nature, your brain is currently doing the math. Right now, it is selecting, discarding, and connecting data points.
So the question for you to mull over, long after we wrap up today's deep dive, is this. In your own life, are you merely sitting back, passively observing the patterns happening to you?
Just floating like inert gas.
Exactly. Or, with every illusion you analyze and every delusion you rebuke, are you actively writing the equation?
Taking control of the math.
Because if you are actively writing the equation, you are no longer stumbling blindly in that dark room. You are finally, intentionally turning on the light. Keep your eyes open, protect your mind, and we will catch you next time.